Good morning, everyone. My name is Davey Lau. I'm a cloud solution consultant at Vero. And joining me online from Montreal is Julio Haas. He's a cloud solution architect. So you heard the story. He was supposed to be here, but flight got canceled. So this morning, we're going to kick it off by talking about legacy applications from migration to modernization and how Vero can help you move your legacy applications and keep your existing investments and move those applications to the cloud. So I'm going to pass it over to Julio first, so he'll start us off, and then I'll join back in a little bit later. So Julio?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Julio. I am from Montreal right now. So today is like 8 degrees, so that's why I decided to stay in Montreal because it's the only day in a year that it's positive weather. So it's not because my flight was delayed. But so guys, thank you for joining us. Today we're gonna talk about application modernization, and during the session we're gonna try to understand what is application modernization. We're gonna go through some strategies, how we can build a strategy, and what is Invero approach for that kind of project. So we have built a framework. We had some real cases, real stories on application modernization, and during the session we're going to cover all of that. Okay, so if you can change the slide, please. Okay, so during the last 10 years, we have been working with different projects and different projects, uh, all focusing on a cloud journey. So a lot of companies adopting cloud. We can see a lot of digital companies sharing their experience as early adopters. And then a lot of companies started to move their workloads to Microsoft Azure, to cloud. So we have been helping a lot of companies on that journey. So from the start of the journey, which is from the beginning of the journey, with a cloud strategy and roadmap development. So going from an assessment, working together with Microsoft, assessing the environment, understanding the business needs, understanding all the motivations, building financial business case, and also building cloud adoption roadmap. So what you should move first, what is the impact on that, and so on. So we have been working with a lot of customers on building that strategy. Most of the applications being moved as is in a lift and shift strategy. So I pick your server, I take our server and move to Azure the way it is without changing anything, just moving the server. After that, before I start to move, I need to build like a foundation. So, and then Invero started to work with a foundation, what we call the Azure Foundation, going to, from the Azure landing zone to infrastructure as code, and then transitioning to infrastructure teams. So how we can build a consistent or a concise foundation where I start to move my workloads from my on-prem data center to Microsoft Azure. So this is what we usually do after a cloud strategy definition. Most of the customers started their journey with the server migration, which is the blue box, and moving all of their servers or part of their servers into Microsoft Azure. And today, I would like to take a step further, and I would like to talk about application modernization. So why we are talking about application modernization? Why are we talking about that? So if you can move the slide, please. Okay, so what we are talking about why we're talking about application modernization. So the market, if we take a look into the digital companies, the early adopters, and all the things that have been changing the way we consume technology over the last years, we're gonna see that the most successful companies are adopting the application modernization. They are referenced on that. So if we take a look in, for example, to one thing that we probably all of here does every day, which is okay. I need to watch a TV show. I would like to watch a movie. We usually don't go to a theater. We stay in our house and open our app to do that. So we need to be able to they need to be able to scale fast. If you just open an app and it's not working, you're gonna just subscribe for a new one from your cell phone. And this is the way that technology works now, right? So if I release a new season of my favorite of my customer favorite series, I want to make sure that when they turn on the TV, they will be able to access my application. So this is what most of the e-commerce, most of the digital companies are looking for. How can I scale? How can I fix some bug? How can I release new versions of my application much faster than 5 years ago, than 10 years ago? And only the new technologies will be able to support that, will enable the companies to have this kind of pace to deliver new features. So that's why application modernization started to be like a fancy word. Everybody's talking about that. If you take a look into the market, the events, the articles, the conference, everybody's talking about that because everybody wants to be digital. Every company will be a digital company. How we can achieve that? Okay, so at the end of the day, what is application modernization? Okay, I want to achieve that. I want to take my applications and I need to modernize that. I need to make sure that I have modernized. But what modernize means? Do I need to modernize that internal application that only my internal users use that? And it doesn't, at the end of the day, it's not a core application for my business. There is no peak season. There is it's not like something that makes money for my business. Do I need to modernize that? I don't know. This is what we're going to cover today. Okay. uh, if you can move to the next slide, we can see that what application modernization is basically the process of updating existing applications with to new language, new frameworks, and new infrastructure platform. And I would say more. It's the process to improve your QN process of deploying applications, of deploying a new release, of deploying a fix, and so on. So we're going to talk about people, we're going to talk about culture, we're going to talk about process, we're going to talk about technology, right? So it's not only about, okay, I'll adopt the technology that everybody's talking about. So everybody's talking about Kubernetes. Do I need to adopt that? Probably yes, but not in all the cases. So we need to better understand, to have a clear view of your current state, to understand what is your next step, what is your application will fit in. Okay, so this is what application modernization is. It starts with a motivation. So exactly as the motivations we had in the migration, the lift and shift migration. So we wanted to save some money. We want to have cost savings, and we wanted to have the limitless scalability. We wanted to be more agile. So I don't want to plan my infrastructure, my compute resources 10 years ahead. I just want to make sure that if I release that new version of my application and it went to a hype, some influencer talk about my application, talk about my service on Instagram, and I need to scale that. I will be able to do that without planning my infrastructure. So this is what we were trying to achieve with cloud. So I want to be able to reach my customers all around the world. So I don't want to build a new data center in Brazil, for example. By the way, I'm from Brazil. I don't want to build a data center in Brazil just to achieve my Brazilian customers. I want to make sure that I can, in a matter of some clicks, create a new VM there, create a new network infrastructure there. So this is what cloud enabled us to do. This is what cloud empowered us to do. But now the challenge is different. We have already achieved that. We know that we can create a new VM. We now needs to scale fast. We need to enable hybrid work. We need to be able to faster our time to market. So the main goal here is to how we can faster our time to market. We want to optimize costs. We want to scale only the small part of my application that is receiving a lot of heat. So maybe I don't want to scale all of my UI. I want to scale my payment service, which is getting a lot of heat during a Black Friday, during Cyber Monday, or a Boxing Day. So this is the motivations of application modernization. So this is where we usually start, understanding why you want to modernize your application. That's why I asked it, do I need to modernize my that internal application that only my internal users use that? Maybe not. Maybe it's not there's not a motivation for that. So it all starts with a motivation. If you can move the slide, please. Why we need to be very we need to have a clear vision of what we want to what we're gonna modernize, because there's a lot of challenge on that. So what are the challenges? The main challenge that we have been working with customers to try to avoid that and try to go over that. So the first one and the biggest one by far is the potential higher cost. So if we take a look into marketing, if you start to go to every application modernization conference, you're gonna see, okay, I need to adopt Kubernetes as soon as possible. I need to adopt every other technology which is beautiful in the marketing slides as soon as possible. And sometimes you don't need to do that, you know. So or because you need to pay that, you need to have high costs. Remember, the cloud, you pay for what you use. So if you start to create a lot of infrastructure, if you start to create a lot of service, a lot of new platforms, you're gonna have a very high cost. And this is what we try to avoid. So we try to avoid basically understanding our business context, creating a business plan and creating a migration and modernization plan. So by far, this is one of the most important challenges. We are going to introduce new bugs. So as soon as we're going to change the code, as soon as we're going to improve the process, as soon as we're going to change the tooling, we're going to introduce new bugs. So we need to have knowledge. We have the right knowledge and the right people doing what needs to be done in terms of application modernization to make sure it's not going to be we're not going to be interrupting the service during business hours and so on. And also we're going to introduce potential latency and performance issues if we don't architect in the right way, if we don't consider the architect framework, if we don't consider a lot of best practices to modernize your application. And at the end of the day, as I said, if you start to adopt new technologies, you're gonna introduce a level of complexity where you need to upskill your employees, you need to upskill your team. So you're not gonna find in front of your house someone that knows Kubernetes, Istio, OpenShift, and all of that that fancy technologies that we have been listening over the last year. So we need to make sure that we are adopting what needs to be adopted, and we can create a plan to upskill your employees. So this is basically from our experience, the challenge that we have been facing with customer, and we have been going over with customers during the last projects that we have delivered. Of course, after the challenge, we have the benefits, right? So what is the benefits of application modernization? If we can move the slide, please. So if we talk about benefits, at the end of the day, we want to be more efficient. We want to eliminate technical depth. We want to be more secure. So as soon as and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, as soon as we move to a more abstractions, and what I mean, as soon as I don't need to manage infrastructure, I don't need to manage operational system, I don't have the responsibility on the security of operational system. I have other responsibilities, and Microsoft and Defender will talk about that today, about what is the tools that will help me to oversee that, will help me to understand what is the security threats that I would have if I modernize my application. So I would like to be more secure. I would like to be more reliable. So since Microsoft is operating the operational system, and I am creating more abstraction, and so I only take care about my application evolution, my code evolution, my code improvements. I am more reliable because Microsoft is taking care of all the infrastructure using years of experience and years of knowledge on how to operate a data center, right? So if you can move, we have different approach to app modernization. So you guys might be heard about a lot of R's that we have. So we have the rehost, replatform, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, replace. So if you make a research, you're gonna see that most of the application modernization articles, even Gartner, are talking about that R. So how you can rationalize your application portfolio and say, okay, part of my applications will go to a rehost strategy, part of my applications will be to replatform strategy, part of my applications will be to a rebuild, will be in the rebuild bucket. So this is what we need to understand. What is the approach? We have different approaches, and it is 100% connected to that potential higher cost challenge. So if we say, okay, modernization is all about rebuild, let's rebuild all of our applications. Okay, you're gonna spend a lot of money on that because you need developers to do that, you need project managers, you need DevOps engineers, you need a lot of things that you need to invest money to do that. So how we can make the right choice on the approach for app modernization? This is why, yeah, if you can move, sorry. If we take a look into the platform, so this is why we are here. So we have a huge platform with a lot of service in Microsoft Azure. So what is the best service? What should I use for that applications to modernize? Do I need to use VM scale set? Do I need to use Kubernetes? Do I need to use OpenShift on Azure? Do I need to use web apps? So what is the best choice here? We have a very broad platform with tons, hundreds of service. What is the best service for my case, for each of my applications? So this is the main question, right? We have a huge data center infrastructure, a globally data center infrastructure, so I can place my application in Brazil, I can place my application in Canada, I can place my application in Dubai, in a lot of countries, different regions. So how can I do that in the more efficient way, spending the right amount of money instead of introducing complexity, introducing a high spend? So this is what we need to avoid here. So we have a broad platform, how we can take the best choice here for our application for our case. So this is why I want to go through our approach and all the lessons learned we had here at Invero. So Dave will talk about the lessons learned. Dave will talk about technology choices. Dave and all the lessons learned. But we built a framework an agile framework to migrate and modernize your applications. So it's basically, we have different phases here, which is something that we call as a migration factory. So basically, we're gonna start discovering your environment and assessing your environment. So right below, you're gonna see some examples of deliverables or tools that we usually use that in each case. So we start discovering all of your application portfolio, all of your infrastructure, where you host your applications, what is the criticity of each applications, and then we can move to the migration planning. So what is the target architecture for each of the applications, or if we're gonna modernize an application, if we're gonna only re-platform that, if we're gonna rebuild that for a container using a container strategy, what we can use as a hosting platform for that. So the goal here is to plan and say, okay, this is a migration or modernization timeline here. After that, we migrate actually using a lot of different assets that we have. We work on DevOps, so Dave will talk about DevOps and why it's so important in your application modernization strategy. And then we continue improve the process. So it's a process, it is an iteration that we monitor, we get the logs, get the metrics, get the feedbacks, manage your application, and then we keep iterating on that to keep improving the process. When we talk about the first phase, which is the discovery and assessment, and how we can create a migration strategy for each of your application, if you can move forward, please. The goal here is basically take a look into all of your application landscape. So most of our customers are running ERPs and running file servers and running payment and running so different profiles of applications with different criticity to different criticity levels to the business. And with different users, with different needs, different dependencies. So the goal here at the end of the day is how we can take that and how we can process that, and how we can divide that, or how we can place that in the right basket here. So, okay, I'll have part of my applications that will be re-architected. I'll have part of my applications that will be re-platformed. So, and then we have which approach have the most complexity, is more complex, and what is less complex. Okay, so this is why we need to carefully assess the application and infrastructure environment. If you can move forward at the end of the day, after the assessment, we want to have a picture like that. So 70% of your application, this is something that we have been seeing in the customers that we have been working with in the application modernization project. So 70% of your applications will be re-architected, refactored, or re-platformed to platform as a service, or will be in the lift and shift strategy. So and then we can start to categorize that. Okay, this is your first wave. So the basic web application, the identity, the already modernized solutions, the VDI solution, and low impact line of business applications. And then you're gonna have the second wave, which is okay. We're talking now about production environments, high IO databases, microservice, some applications that we need to decouple, applications that we need to re-architect, to refactor the code. So there will be a change in the code. So we need to better test, we need to better plan, then we need to carefully take a look on that. And then what is costly to move? So if we have a mainframe, it's going to be costly to move. It's a high cost. So how we can plan, how we can make sure that we can even modernizing, keep having, still have a hybrid environment with my modernized applications connecting to a mainframe, for example. How we can modernize the mainframe without killing the mainframe. So it's possible. We have been seeing, we have been working in a lot of solutions where we just create a layer of abstraction where all of my modernized solutions will access the layer of abstraction and will consume the mainframe. So how we can do that? So this is something that we can certainly help you guys to plan, and this is some approaches for the application modernization. Around 30% of your applications will be around 30% of your applications will actually be retained. So maybe applications that doesn't worth to migrate, doesn't worth the investment to migrate, and also another applications that will be replaced. So maybe doesn't make sense to move your Exchange server to Azure. Maybe doesn't make sense to make an investment to move your SharePoint. So you can just migrate to Microsoft 365. You can use security service that Defender will talk about today instead of migrate your security server. So you're gonna migrate mainly to software as a service solutions. And this is the main goal here. So at the end of the day, we want to have a picture like that. With all of your applications categorized, right? So after that, we're going to start to talk about some examples of assessment, and I think that Dave will give you more context on what is the examples of outcomes that we're going to have from an application assessment, from an infrastructure assessment. What is the importance of DevOps in the process of application modernization, and also one real case of application modernization project that we have delivered as Invero. So, Davey, the stage is yours. Before I move to Davey, is there any question here, guys? No? Okay, go ahead, Davey.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about the analysis phase of the project. So when Invero was first brought in to look at your legacy application, we do an analysis. So one of the tools that we use is called Cloud Pilot. So Cloud Pilot provides a deep and detailed analysis of applications and their readiness to migrate to a cloud environment. It also provides application and database recommendations, required code changes, cost estimates, and effort estimates. So on this next slide, here's a screenshot of what a sample assessment would look like. So some of the key fields I've highlighted in red. So really useful information here. We have 3 different methods of hosting your application. You got containers, you got virtual machines, Azure App Service. It gives you an estimated monthly cost for your database. It's comparing here SQL DB and SQL on VMs. And it also gives you an estimated migration effort, which is also shown out here. So you got nice charts here to compare. It gives you an estimate in days and hours of effort. And here is an example of the assessment analyzing your code. So it actually gives some suggestions on what needs to be changed, and also estimate efforts in hours, and also in terms of size, like is it a medium size change or a small size change. So this information is really useful for us to determine which technology we're going to use. So based on the application assessment and also your business needs, one of the following compute services may be recommended. So these are not all the types of resources that are available in Azure, obviously. So these are only ones that are used to host your application. There are resources for databases, integration components, networking, but we're not going to focus on that today. We'll talk about these resources right here. So I'll start on the left, virtual machines. We're probably all familiar with that. So this is your classic infrastructure as a service offering, but most people aren't really interested in using a VM when they think of modernization. They want a more cloud native way of hosting their applications. So we can look at some of these other options. I'm going to skip over to app service first. So Azure App Service is a fully managed platform for hosting your web applications, REST APIs, mobile backends. It's a fully managed environment, so there's no need to do your own updates. There's also automatic scaling that you can set up. Azure Functions at the end here, that is a serverless solution for running APIs. So it's great for starting up quickly. You can just focus on running your business logic. You don't need to worry about plumbing, writing plumbing code or maintaining infrastructure. It's great for, like I said, running APIs, so it fits in with microservices architecture. And I left the other three at the end because they all deal with something called containers. So we have Azure Kubernetes Service, container instances, and container apps. So what exactly are containers? So with VMs, VMs are basically slicing up the hardware into individual OSs. So that's what VMs are. With a container, you're actually slicing up the operating system into separate instances. So the degree of isolation is not as strong as a VM, but with a container, what you get is a very small and lightweight package that can start up almost immediately. So that's great for microservices, because if you have a lot of microservices, then containers can spin up quickly and they can scale up quickly. So one of the options for hosting containers is Kubernetes, so Azure Kubernetes Service. So it's an open source, or Kubernetes is an open source system for automating scaling, deployment, and managing your containerized applications. So what AKS does for you is it manages the node or the VM that is responsible for the scaling and hosting the Kubernetes API. You're still responsible for your own nodes that host your own applications, though. It is kind of the gold standard for hosting containerized applications, but is very complex to set up. You do need advanced knowledge. Not every organization has that skill in-house. There's a high learning curve there. For in terms of container instances, so container instances is the easiest way to run your container applications. So it's really meant for temporary processes because it's not meant to be up all the time. So you spin it up, you run something, maybe a processing job, and then it shuts down. So if you have something that's temporary and just need some extra processing powers, then you can use that. Container apps, that is the latest offering from Microsoft around hosting containers. So I think Microsoft heard from people that AKS was a little too complicated. So they created container apps, which is basically running Kubernetes in the background, but you're not exposed to all the complexities of setting up Kubernetes. So the degree of customization is not as great, but you get a much simpler experience of setting up containers. So I'm going to move on to the topic of DevOps. So when people think of DevOps, they usually think of a continuous integration, continuous deployment tool such as Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. But the term DevOps is actually the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end users. So yes, Azure DevOps or GitHub is an integral part of that equation, but it's not the only part of it. We have to bring in processes like agile development and change how people work. So change how teams and people work and how they operate. So the goal of DevOps is speed. We want to increase the speed at which we make changes and deploy code and bring new features to customers. Reliability. We want to have a consistent way of deploying code and infrastructure. Scale. So as your company grows, you're going to have more infrastructure, more applications, more complex deployments. You don't want to be manually deploying all this code because you're going to make mistakes. So how can we scale? By using DevOps, we can automate these processes and scale. Improve collaboration. The whole Azure DevOps culture really emphasizes ownership. So, for example, we're not going to have developers write code and then saying, I'm not going to test it. I'm just going to pass it off to the QA team to test it. Well, with DevOps, it really encourages developers to write their own unit tests and include that in the pipeline. So developers work across the entire application lifecycle, from development to testing to operations, and also security. So you can integrate security scanning tools into your pipelines that can scan your code for security vulnerabilities. You can enforce code reviews, etc. So let's look at how a CI/CD tool such as Azure DevOps can help you achieve some of these goals. So here's a diagram of an example CI/CD deployment workflow. So it's usually kicked off when a developer makes a change to the code and they commit it to a repository. They then create what's called a pull request. So a pull request is basically telling people that my change is done. The code is usually in a separate feature branch. And once they create the pull request, it kicks off Azure pipeline or a pipeline that runs many different tasks. So some of the tasks include security scanning, scan your code for any vulnerabilities, making sure your code is following best practices. And there's a lot of other third-party tools that you can integrate. It does a build. It also runs the unit tests that I was talking about that developers should write as a best practice. And it also enforces a code review. So it makes you work with another developer to look at your code, and then that person actually has to approve your change. So once that change is approved, it can move on to the next stage. And in that stage, it basically runs some of the same tasks as the PR stage. So it does a build, it runs those same tests. In this stage, you can run additional tests like integration tests or end-to-end tests. In between stages, you can also have approvals from different people in your company. So you might have a manager approve the deployment. And once that second stage is done, you can go on to the deployment stage. So you can deploy your code to your different environments. So here you have staging and production environments. Once it's deployed to staging, you might have some manual testing here, maybe by a QA team. Once they approve, then you can deploy it to a production environment. So by automating all these steps, we reduce our manual mistakes. We increase our code quality by running automated tests, code scans, and enforcing code reviews. And we increase the speed at which we can deploy our changes. So how do we measure the success of an app modernization project? So metrics are needed to measure the ROI on an app modernization project. Navero can help in the setup of capturing these metrics through various Azure tools, such as Azure Monitor and Azure DevOps. So I've listed a few examples of metrics that we can capture. For example, if your objective is business value due to cloud adoption, you can measure percentage of delivered capabilities versus proposed capabilities, time to market, you can measure application latency and response time. So the key is that all these metrics are available in Azure. We can help with recording that for you. So any questions about that before we move on? Before any questions on DevOps or analysis tools or anything like that before I move on to case studies?
Actually, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
It has to do with the Cloud Pilot.
Yeah.
Are you able to find criteria in terms of other factors other than technical pieces? So as an example, I mean, when you're evaluating, it's not just technical pieces, it's also the business value, including cost.
Yeah.
So are those criteria points actually enabled within Copilot so that when it spits out a solution?
Yeah, we don't rely only. So the question was,
does evaluating ROI or something?
Sure.
Yeah, so the question was, does Cloud Pilot also analyze your business needs? No, Cloud Pilot is only for the technical piece, but that's not the only analysis we do. So we do analysis for business.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking on when you're evaluating an application, whether or not it's an on-prem kind of app to even apps that's on the cloud out there. And like you need to be able
You compare it against like a SaaS solution.
correct, yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of the tools that we use for Unified Cloud. We strategically probably is going to be the partner with us as well. You can find them in the marketplace on Azure as well. We're using them even for the cost management, cost optimization packages, and we're using them for cloud assessment, for app assessment. So the traditional assessment tools, probably you've heard about the Block 64, Demaware, that actually analyze your infrastructure. And that's basically on the step on the when you build your cloud strategy and you try to understand your environment. So the further step, why it's very similar right now to the modernization discussion, is the Cloud Pilot tool will do the deep dive inside of your application, and it will provide you options about what you can do with this application. So like if we, let's say, let's just make the example of simple application. You have the .NET application as an app, and you have a traditional VM running the SQL Server as a backend database component for that application. So the Cloud Pilot tool will analyze your code inside of your .NET application, and will analyze your database structure, and it will provide you the options for the modernization when you go in Azure. In terms of your questions, like I try to capture your answer here as well. In terms of the question about, is that the right decision? Is that the right solution in terms of money, budget, effort, and change to move in the cloud? We like based on our experience, we will provide the best option. For instance, if it's reasonable, we don't have much time to change your on-prem SQL Server to Azure SQL, and the best approach is going to be lift and shift or re-platform them to the SQL MI. We will provide that probably opportunity. We'll probably put that in solution because based on the time frame. If it's like zero code changes, when you move basically from traditional SQL to the MI, it's going to be zero code change. If it's a small project, it's an MVP or a pilot, like when we have still time, we can consider the option moving to the SQL database, Elastic or whatever. The same story with the application level. Most likely, the simplest way will be moving to the service app, but there is still option to orchestrate the Kubernetes and to build AKS from this application. So we need to understand, like, is it reasonable right now to modernize your application to the AKS level? If it's just a traditional application running .NET application, most likely 95% is going to be the service app will work. But again, based on our experience and conversation with you, we will define what probably approach will be the best for your needs. So there is no generic answer about, what is going to be best. Sometimes you can invest in time you spend, which is the money right now, to get the UAKS working. Sometimes it's not reasonable for you because you understand strategically this application will be in your company for the next, let's say 12 months. So, it doesn't worth any investment right now to bring AKS in your environment right now. So, but long story short, we're using this tool to do the deep dive inside of your application and find the options and then estimates. And we understand how much work we need to do to modernize specific component of the application.
Exactly.
Well, I was just trying to
It sounds like
whether or not it's kind of built into the.
not like this. That spits out you have to use X, and we're going to use X, like that. So lots of things back. So it's lots of factors we take into account, like your cost, your staff, you have the skill to run, this technology. How important is this application to your business? If it's super risky to change, then you have to look at some other options. So, yes.
If you've got existing, I've never used Cloud, but if you've got existing function apps or logic apps that exist in your Azure cloud, various resource groups, can you use Cloud Pilot to do an assessment on those for options to revamp or make cheaper, those kinds of things?
No, I don't think Cloud Pilot works for those resources. It's for your on-premise applications. But back to your question, this case study will kind of deal with some of the issues that you asked about. So one of our clients is based out of Toronto. Their name is Multi-Health Systems, or MHS. So they are a leading publisher of scientifically validated assessments. So their customers include research institutions, education sector, healthcare professionals such as psychologists, and also school districts. So they give these questionnaires to their clients to diagnose certain conditions. And some of these assessments are delivered online. So this was one of the applications that we had looked at. So this web application was running a very old .NET framework, version 2.0 and 3.5. It was running on an on-premise Windows server 2008. And the people at the company had minimal knowledge of this application because they had acquired this application from another company many years ago. And since that time, everyone had left and no one really knew much about it. And on top of that, there was zero documentation on this application. They were complaining about performance issues. They have this annual extract of data for their customers. And sometimes for their large customers, it was taking days or over a week to do these extracts. And sometimes the process would error out and they would have to start over. So it was not a good experience for their customers. So we looked at a few different approaches. Since we had very little knowledge of this application, no one had any knowledge of it, we had no documentation, we suggested, what's the safest way of moving this to the cloud? We suggested a lift and shift, which is basically just moving your application onto the latest version of Windows Server on a VM on the cloud. But the client was adamant that they don't want to do that, which is a valid argument. They want to move to something more cloud native, which is fine. So we decided to do a re-platform to Azure, and as a starting point, try to make as minimal code changes as possible because we want to reduce the risk of basically moving this to the cloud. Okay, so let's start with the database. So they're running SQL Server on-prem, and on Azure, there are three flavors of Azure SQL. So the first one is SQL Server on Azure VMs, basically just installing SQL on a VM. There's Azure SQL Database. So this is a fully hosted and managed solution. So all the maintenance and complex procedures that have a high uptime and SLA are fully managed by Microsoft. And they also manage backups and restores. And you can also dynamically scale up and down your instance as well. And then we have Azure SQL Managed Instance. So this provides almost feature parity with on-prem SQL. So if you have features you use like cross-database queries and SQL agent jobs, then we can move that to Azure SQL Managed Instance without making any code changes. So when we ran the database migration assistant, that's another tool that we use. It's similar to Cloud Pilot. It showed that there was usage of SQL agent jobs and cross-database queries. So we did look at maybe we can rewrite those in some other way, like Azure Functions or Logic Apps. But then again, we thought we don't want to increase the risk of moving this in cloud. We want to keep this code as is as much as possible. So we decided to choose Azure SQL Managed Instance. It is a little bit more expensive than Azure SQL database, but by using managed instance, we can reduce the risk.
Can I ask why it's not compatible with Azure SQL database? Because agent jobs across database queries, I mean, those are standard stuff that people run.
Yeah, because Azure SQL database is a shared resource. It's not like dedicated to you, like a VM or a SQL managed instance. So like a SQL managed instance, you can almost think of it as a VM, but Microsoft manages it for you. That's why it's so expensive. So Azure SQL, like other PaaS services, is a shared resource. And it seems that's why.
If you have your SQL jobs running, you still can use MI right now. You can replace them potentially with the functions, let's say in Azure, but if you want to do the lift and shift, apples to apples migration without like literally zero code change, it's going to be MI. The second reason for the critical business, like speaking of the disaster recovery and high availability, Microsoft provides a great opportunity for managed instances and geo redundancy. If you have right now your always on or mirroring set up for the replication on prem, Azure SQL MI will do the same work across the different regions as well. So you don't need to build the replication by yourself. That will be taken care of by Microsoft. So all infrastructure components will be covered by Microsoft. As the end user of current SQL, you will see almost the same story, but the maintenance will be on Microsoft's shoulders. So less replication issues, less maintenance, and less code changes if you go to MI. It is a little bit more expensive, but you need to do the compare when you calculate the best option for you. If it's SQL MI or Azure SQL, it comes to the data storage. So we're talking about hundreds of terabytes of data. You will find that MI costs not significantly bigger than SQL because the pricing for your SQL will be on basically most on the storage. If speaking of the small instance, yes, probably Elastic or Azure SQL will be a better option in terms of cost efficiency. But speaking of the big data, SQL MI will be on that level.
And sorry, just to add in too, there's also some compatibility issues with Azure SQL for the PaaS instance versus MI. If you're using like SQL agent or even some of the stored procedures, those functions are limited in the PaaS option. So that compatibility analysis is done during that phase.
So let's talk about the application. So I talked about these performance issues that they were having with these processing jobs. So they had these jobs that were very resource intensive, and in the legacy system, they were running as executables as Windows services. So we decided to move these services to Azure Web Jobs. So Web Jobs allow you to run these scripts in Azure App Service. Again, we looked at rewriting these as well. But you can see the recurring theme here. We're trying to reduce the risk and not make changes to the code because we don't know anything of the code. We don't want to break anything. So we're able to move these to web jobs, running an app service. And we put them inside their own app service plan. So app service plan is your unit of scale, the app service. So by putting them in their own app service plan, we can scale these independently from the rest of the application. Now, there were a few other components of this application. There was the main web app, there was a marketing website, a SOAP service. We moved all in the app service. It was quite easy to do that and quite quick as well. It wasn't complicated at all. So storage. So before, all these applications were running on a single VM and they were all running to the local hard drive. Obviously now we're in Azure, it's a distributed system. We don't have this common local drive to write to anymore. So we decided to move that storage to Azure Blob Storage. So Blob Storage is Microsoft's object storage solution for the cloud. It's optimized for storing massive amounts of unstructured data. So now the different apps and services can reach into this common storage account and read from there instead of from a common local file system. Refactoring. So I talked about trying to minimize the amount of code changes and refactoring. But for this component, we we had to make some changes here. So they had this very expensive library that they used for pretty simple tasks, which was converting HTML to PDF. So we no longer had a valid license for this library, and we tried to seek out something that was also a little bit more cost effective. So because of this, we had to rewrite the code. So we decided to refactor just this component. We pulled it out into its own microservice, and we rewrote it using the latest version of .NET. So this is a good example of just refactoring a small component of the application instead of making huge changes to it. Some additional requirements. The application URL and path must remain the same as the legacy application. So they want the root path to go to the main application, and then /soap to go to the soap service. But if you remember, we had put those two components in separate app services. So by default, they actually have completely different URLs. So we need to rectify that problem. Another requirement was the security audit required a certain list of cipher suites to be used. So cipher suites are the encryption algorithm used during a TLS or SSL handshake. So when you visit a secure website, you might see that lock in your browser. So that's using TLS encryption. So the client wanted a specific list of encryption algorithms to use based on the security audit that they had performed on their system. So how did we satisfy these requirements? We were able to kill two birds with one stone by using something called the application gateway. It's a layer 7 load balancer, so it's able to route web traffic based on our URL. So for example, if you go to /ecosystem/images to go to this server pool, a server pool is basically your application. It can be anything. It can be an app service, it can be VM. You can have /video to go to this other app pool. So we're able to use this for URL routing, and it also allows configuration of custom cipher suites without any code change. And an added bonus, it also gives you a web application firewall, which helps protect your application from malicious attacks. So the end result, the processing time went down for the longest file export from about a week to about 20 minutes. We have increased security compliance due to the custom cipher suites and moving off of Windows Server 2008. And now that they're on Azure, they have access to many more security tools. I mean, Defendant will be talking more about security as well. There is increased visibility into the application now with increased logging, dashboards, and alerting setup. And now there's also a renewed interest and vigor from the product team. So before, nobody knew anything about the application, nobody wanted to touch it, but now they've seen the changes that we've made, the new technology being used, people are excited again. You have a product owner, they're using the DevOps project that we set up, and they're starting to create their own CI/CD pipelines now. So it's nice to see that. So app mod is not a one and done deal. We've moved them onto Azure now, but we can always do more continual improvements. So some future app modernization work here, we can upgrade to the latest version of .NET, so we can run on Linux app service plans because the latest version of .NET is cross-platform. So I'll save you an immediate 40% cost savings. We can continue to split the application into separate microservices for more agile development. Third point, we can set up CI/CD pipelines. They're actually starting to do that already. Add automated security scanning. We can set up high availability by automatically failing over to a secondary region. So in summary, we showed that it doesn't have to be a long and difficult process to move a legacy application onto the cloud. So we can do a re-platform like I've shown here fairly quickly and with minimal code changes to reduce the risk. And once you're on Azure, you can use agile process and DevOps to incrementally make changes and take advantage of other Azure features or new Azure features as they arise. So yeah, that takes us to the end of the presentation. Are there
I
any?
think Max just wanted to
Okay, Max.
hold it up, pull it all together here. Thanks.
I don't know, some of you may know me, some don't know. My name is Max. I'm just cloud solution architect in Xero. You may ask the question, why you need to give your trust to Enviro to help you with that modernization journey? Sean gave me 2 minutes, so I will give you only 2 reasons why Enviro. The first reason is about the frameworks that we follow. The second reason is going to be in our people. The first one is simple. So we follow the cloud adoption framework, and follow the well architecture framework from the Microsoft when we build our solutions, when we migrate environment in Azure, when we develop native microservices and build new systems in Azure. Like, we always follow the cloud adoption framework and well architecture framework. The pillars around the cost management, performance, scalability, security, of course, always in our projects, no matter what we do. AVD deployment, app modernization, lift and shift migration, data migration. So it's all about cloud adoption framework and well architecture framework. We even pass our advanced specializations because we follow the cloud adoption and well architecture framework. So those guys always in our scope, in our proposals, in our delivery. That's very important. The second reason, people, because our culture, when we participate in our engagement with the clients, we listen to understand. We listen not to reply. So we try to feel your pain. We try to understand what constraints do you have right now, what pain points you're challenging right now with your on-prem infrastructure, with your application portfolio, and how we can help you. And we try to find the best solution. It might be the refactor option. It might be the re-architecture option, but we are part of your team. We are extension of your IT department, and we try to care about your application, your business, your budget, and we try to build a solution based on these components. So, like, again, no matter what we do, we try to be part of your team, and we follow the Microsoft best practice recommendation to build our solutions. Thanks, guys.
Any questions?
Yeah, we certainly got some time for questions. If anybody, either on the call or in the room, has any. You know, maybe I'll just add something as you may be thinking if you had a question on is a piece that David touched on early in the presentation, but didn't necessarily come up at the end there was kind of that upskilling of the client environment. And you know, a lot of this, I joined Enviro in the summer, and a lot of this work happened kind of in the spring, so I wasn't here for it. But a lot of the stories of what I've learned from Mike, who's the CTO and COO over there, would be that it was quite a significant culture shift in their IT department, and then ultimately how it bubbles up to the business. They were feeling kind of tired. They were feeling, you know, kind of stuck in this old school mode and just repeat. And through the work that Davey, the work that Enviro did overall, and I see it now because I engage with this client, I engage with Mike and his team. That like they have a new set of legs under them, right? They got a new set of energy around them, and the skills that Davey has taught them is awesome. Like on one hand, he's kind of worked himself out of a job, right? Which is actually perfect, right? Is to help them go, look, here's how you do this, here's how you do this. I'm going to help you here. I'm going to do this part for you, but now this, you can go, right? And I think that's pretty cool that just that environment at MHS is uplifted as a result of going through this journey. Oh.